We will call the meeting to order, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next, we have roll call, and if the city clerk would announce attendance.
All council members are present. Thank you.
Thank you. First item is the consent calendar, and these items will be approved by one motion unless any member of the council or audience wishes to remove the item for discussion. Do any council members wish to remove an item? Are there any members of the public who wish to remove an item? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to council, and we have a motion by Councilmember McAllister.
I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. And a second by Councilmember Ramirez. And I don't see any further discussion, so we'll call the question. And that passes unanimously. Thank you. Next on the agenda is oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section, and state law prohibits the council from acting on non-agenda items. Is there anyone who wishes to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda tonight? Okay, seeing none, we'll close that portion of the meeting. And we will move on to item 7.1, which is use of unmanned aircraft systems, also known as drones, in support of city operations. And we will start with a staff presentation.
Good evening, everybody. Lieutenant Saul Jager with the Police Department. Several Mountain View City departments, Public Works, Fire, and Police are interested in using unmanned aircraft systems or drones, drone technology, to enhance our operations, to work safer, and provide better and more efficient service within each respective area's responsibility. Each department has developed or is in the process of developing department-specific policies and procedures to be followed in conjunction with an overarching city council policy that we're going to be talking about tonight in a little more detail. On April 9th of this year, the City Council held a study session to discuss the use of unmanned aircraft systems. At this session, Council directed staff to develop an overarching City Council policy governing the responsible use of UAS by city departments. Additionally, the Council directed staff to conduct community informational campaigns through in-person and online opportunities. The proposed City Council policy, which was reviewed and accepted by the Council Policy and Procedures Committee on August 27th, addresses questions and concerns about government use of UAS technology, especially related to how privacy will be maintained and how the collected data and evidence will be retained and used. The protection of individual civil rights and the reasonable expectation of privacy remain key components of any decision to deploy a UAS. And this policy is aligned with the ACLU recommended guidelines on government use of drone technology, which prohibits the following. I'm going to read this from the script directly. Conducting any business other than official city business, conducting random or proactive surveillance activities, targeting a person based solely on individual characteristics, and placing any weapons on the UAS system. Those are all prohibited. Additionally, the policy addresses concerns regarding data collection and retention. Specifically, all the data that's retained as public record will be collected and stored in compliance with an approved digital evidence management system. Data will be maintained in accordance with the city's records retention schedule or as required for criminal or civil proceedings. Any unauthorized use, duplication, publication, or distribution of UAS videos and images is prohibited. And release of any recordings shall be made in compliance with any relevant Public Records Act laws. Additionally, requests for deletion of accidental recordings shall be completed in accordance with current department policy. It's very similar to our officer-worn camera policies. Also at the April 9th study session, Council directed staff to conduct community outreach to hear and address any questions and or concerns that they may have. Staff conducted a public online informational campaign seeking concerns and questions from the community. We published and published a podcast with an FAA representative as a guest on that podcast. Posted a public service announcement raising awareness of a community information session which was scheduled for the evening of August 15th at the police department. And we successfully conducted that information session, which was also live casted for those that were not able to attend in person. We received minimal feedback, questions, and or concerns throughout all of our outreach efforts. Oops, I'm behind on the slides, sorry. So UAS, in closing, UAS technology has quickly become an invaluable tool for municipal governments throughout the country as well as many of our neighboring cities. This proposed city council policy ensures that UAS technology that's utilized by the city is deployed responsibly, holding the privacy and civil rights of our community at the forefront. So based on that, we recommend that the council adopt the city council policy as written on the use of unmanned aircraft systems. And thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Hicks?
So staff answered most of my questions, but I have a couple of follow-up questions based on those answers. So I asked the number of drones, if departments had any estimates for how many they wanted to purchase over the next year or two. And the answer was the police were planning 2 and fire 1. And I was just wondering whether we had a short turnaround time this time for council questions, whether there were any other departments looking into purchase, such as Public Works, for example, or any other departments.
Mike Fuller, Public Works Director. We're kind of following police's lead on this. I think at first we may borrow their pilots and drones just to kind of get a sense of how we're going to deploy them. I know we're going to do roof inspections and gutter inspections and things. You can imagine this building, it's pretty challenging to get up there and look. And then within a fairly short period of time, we will likely be requesting the purchase of one. It may not be quite as sophisticated as theirs, but we're kind of just following their lead on it and taking it a little slower than there.
Thank you. My one last question is, one of the answers that staff gave was for facial redaction, they would use the requirements of the current Public Records Act, but I'm not familiar with that. What exactly does that require?
I can address that question. The Public Records Act, for privacy interests, does not spell out exact components such as facial images. It just provides the public agency with a balancing test where the public agency has to balance the privacy interest versus the interest in disclosure. So something like personal identity would be very similar to, say, a social security number or a personal phone number, where we would the redaction in this case would be to blur the identity of the person.
So does that mean that faces will be redacted?
Yes, I mean, it's really a case-by-case basis. If there's a huge crowd, say at a concert, and the faces aren't distinguishable, we'd have to look at that. But if there's a close-up of a person, maybe standing in front of his or her home, then the test changes. It's a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ramirez?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions. So first, I asked the question about code enforcement. It strikes me as this could be a very useful technology in that context. And unless I'm totally mistaken, code enforcement is housed within the city attorney's office right now, right? So if the city attorney's office, for code enforcement purposes, wanted to use this technology, they'd have to draft up their own department policy. But would the council then need to amend this policy in order to permit departments that are currently not listed to use the technology?
Yeah, I can answer that. No, any department, the idea behind the city council overarching policy was that any department that's interested in using it has to develop their own mission-specific and department-specific policy, following the guidelines from the city council policy.
Okay, so this is not a whitelist then. There are examples listed here from some departments, but any other department, even if it's not listed in the policy, could develop its own set of guidelines and policies and use the technology.
Yes.
Okay, got it, thank you. And then the question about the contractors and third parties. So if a city department, could a city department authorize a contractor or some other third party to use this technology to conduct city business?
As far as I know, no, they would need to work as a separate entity, which means they're going to fall under the Part 107 rules, just like a subcontractor would.
So for city business, the technology can only be used by city employees?
Right, so the intention of the policy is for city employees using the technology. If an outside vendor is going to use it for aerial photography or something like that, they're going to have to carry their own licensed pilots, and that falls under the commercial use of Part 107.
Right, so, and then just because I think I may be missing the point, but if a city department, say Public Works, is working with a contractor, some other third party to conduct city business, they couldn't authorize that contractor to use the technology. We would have to get Public Works staff, for instance, to use the technology for city business.
Right, as far as I understand it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the council? Did you have questions? Yeah. Okay, seeing none, we'll open it up for public input. So if there's anyone who wants to address the council on this item, if you could come up to the microphone here and be sure to fill out a speaker card either before or after you speak and leave it with the city clerk. And it looks like there's not a huge crowd tonight to do that, so you can have 3 minutes. And you can fill that out after.
Thanks a lot, Alex Nunez. With the UAS policy, definitely drones, very new and exciting technology, a lot of good uses that we can deploy them for. The fire department, police department, public works department, they did a good job at the community outreach. When we went to the police department, I think there's a lot of legitimate uses for this drone technology. But obviously, there are a lot of concerns that residents have relating in particular to things like privacy and also the operational use for safe and also, for lack of better terms, not annoying use of drones, which can be noisy, sound like bees. So there's a couple of policy concerns, and they typically fall into 3 buckets. One is the operations and the use case. So when, why, who, where, all those questions about how and where UAS systems can be deployed and what they can be used for. In particular, privacy, what protections are going to be given to citizens who don't want to get caught up inadvertently in some kind of surveillance dragnet, and information security and governance around protecting the data that is collected. I did have a chance to review the city council policy. I checked with a bunch of our neighbors and friends, and a few conclusions that we came up with, or kind of came to after review, is that the current policy for operational controls is very broad and unrestricted, and we'll get into why. And for privacy safeguards, it's almost completely lacking in privacy safeguards. And the reason why is because Part 107, which, as has been referenced, is the rule that places restrictions and licensing requirements on this utilization of this technology. They go over things like daylight operations, line of sight, no weapons, things like that, operation over human beings. However, that law or rule does go to great lengths to say that any of these provisions can be waived at any time after going through the appropriate waiver process. So as you can see, all of the restrictions basically can be waived. So the rule itself says while we do restrict the use, we can actually let you waive all of them. So the proposed language in the current council policy where it says all UAS operations will be conducted in accordance with current FAA rules, well, all of those rules can be waived, and that just leaves department policy. Yeah. And as far as privacy goes, again, Part 107 goes to great lengths to say that this rule does not include privacy regulations. It says that the FAA's mission does not include regulating privacy. And when I looked at the council policy here, it says that training will be conducted according to the current FAA rules and regulations. So the civil liberties will be conducted according to the FAA rules and regulations, which the FAA says that it does not regulate privacy. So yeah, what we are asking is that the council take this back to the community, kind of like a privacy visioning plan, so that the community can drive this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the council on this topic? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public input portion. Are there any questions or comments from council members? Vice Mayor Abe-Koga?
Thank you. Actually, sorry, I pressed the motion button, but I'll leave it on in case there's not too much comment. The CPPC, the Council Procedure Policy and Procedures Committee, reviewed this policy. We did look at it as a council before. I think it's a good start. It's new, and new technologies always take time to figure out, I'd say. So, I think we should go ahead and move forward with this. There's always the room for changes if needed. So once we get this up and running and see how things go, if there's a need for any amendments, we can go ahead and do that. But I think it's fine, and I will be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Councilmember Hicks?
So I see how this could be helpful to staff. At the same time, some members of the public have raised concerns to me, mostly regarding privacy and the potential for mission creep. So I would like to see a cap of some sort with a report back once that cap is reached, so that there wouldn't be, in particular, people have raised a concern of just really a large number of them. And so I would like some number at which we would automatically revisit this. Thank you.
Councilmember Ramirez?
Thank you. And thank you to the CPBC for taking a look at this, and for staff for very quickly getting back to us on all of the questions we submitted. I think the concern, so thank you for explaining the third party issue. In the event, so I trust city staff with the technology. I think I would be concerned if departments at some future date would have the ability to authorize non-city employees to use the technology to conduct city business, if those contractors or third parties were not also subject to the city's policies governing the use. So if I understood, it sounds like right now, third parties conducting city business would not be able to use the technology, so I'm comfortable with that. But if that does change, then I would like to see the policy come back to us, just so we make sure that, I want those folks who are doing city business, whether or not they're employees, to adhere to our policies. And the other thing, just going back to the code enforcement thing, I think so code enforcement, as I understand it, is almost entirely, it is private property. So we're going to be using this technology, presumably, in the event that the city attorney's office would like to use it, to take a look at the status of a given private property. And I think that's important enough to warrant inclusion explicitly in the policy. Or another way, so either to provide that as an example, because I think that's a big one, or if the maker of the motion would be comfortable with this, maybe using this as the starting point and make it a white list. And then if other city departments discover a need for the technology, then it can come back to us and then we can authorize it. So if the city attorney's office said, yeah, this is actually really helpful for us when doing code enforcement work, would you mind modifying the policy so we can authorize that explicitly? So those would be two changes, modifications that I would be interested in including. I want to defer to the members of the CPPC since you've looked at this more carefully than I have, but those were the two things that struck out. Thank you.
Thank you. Our city manager has...
Yeah, just to comment on both of those two things. First of all, on the second one in terms of code enforcement, again, the policy is written to say these are examples but are not limited to. So our understanding of the policy is any city department as long as they have their own. Having said that, you could certainly amend that sentence to be more explicit that other departments could be covered as well. I think I would recommend against having to come back to you every time a department wants to do something. Sometimes that might be time sensitive, and the whole point of having a citywide policy is you're comfortable with the overall approach, and then each department has their own rules and operational guidelines. On the second point, I just want to clarify, there might have been a little bit of a misunderstanding. There may be situations where the city hires an outside company to do an inspection of a roof or something for us with a drone. In those cases, I think what Sergeant Yeager was saying is they would officially be covered under different rules, but we as an organization would still expect anyone doing work for us to follow the guidance of our policy.
Thank you. So I just had a couple of comments. I am a member of the Council Policy and Procedure Committee and had the opportunity to ask quite a few questions there, and I felt like we had a good discussion. I just want to clarify that something we discussed there that sort of came up here. It's my understanding that the Part 107 rules, the city cannot grant exceptions to those. You have to go back to the FAA, right? Right. They're not something we can just say, oh, we don't want to follow that. We have to, unless they grant an exception. Okay. That's all I had. I will be supporting this. I think the Vice Mayor is...
I appreciate Councilmember Ramirez's suggestions. I'm actually comfortable with the way it is now. I think, again, we're starting this new program, and I would expect us to get some reports along the way of how things are going. And, I guess I don't envision us having excessive drones out there right away. So, I think as we administer the program, the longer we do and we get more data and information as to how it's going, we could, definitely revisit the policy if needed. But I think as it is right now, I feel comfortable with it, and I think it'll be a slow startup of the program rolling out. So with that, I will make a motion, and I believe I need to read. My motion is to adopt a resolution adopting City Council Policy K23, use of unmanned aircraft systems.
So we have a motion by the Vice Mayor and a second by Councilmember McAllister. Councilor Ramirez, you had something?
Just, I don't want to belabor the point, but to the Vice Mayor's suggestion, if we could have a report back after some reasonable amount of time on, I mean, I don't want to just like sort of make up on the fly what would be useful information, but I would be curious to know, if other departments begin using it, and sort of what the intended use. Just because I mean, this is I'm comfortable with this list. It's just I feel like it would be hard to maintain some level of oversight if we're in a periodic report back once a year or something. We're not told, other departments are starting to use this technology and for this purpose. I think that it would be helpful for me just to get a sense of whether there's, I don't know if mission creep is one way of putting it, but that's not the intention here. But if it does become widespread across other departments not listed here, I'd appreciate that knowledge. Thank you.
Councilmember Kamei.
Great, thank you. So I think one of the things that I had mentioned when we first looked at this was taking a look at what the Santa Clara County had done with their surveillance technology and community safety ordinance. And I appreciated staff's community outreach, the public information campaign, both in person and online opportunities, the podcast, social media, as well as the community informational session. I think that extensive outreach was done by staff, and I appreciate that. All of that is outlined on page 8 of the staff report. And also appreciate the consideration for the ACLU guidelines. When the ordinance I mentioned went forward to the county, the ACLU was heavily involved and gave a lot of input. And I think that helps inform drone use policy going forward in other local jurisdictions. And I think that this policy actually does incorporate that. I also support the idea of a report back. I would just be interested in some sort of update. As Councilmember Ramirez mentioned, I'm not prescriptive on what's included, but just would be kind of interested. So I'll be supporting the motion tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Hicks.
So I agree that as you can tell, I'm a little hesitant about the policy, but I would be supporting it if it can include some sort of report back.
Vice Mayor Abe-Koga.
Thank you. So in the interest of I'd like to go ahead and incorporate in the motion a report back in, let's say, a year's time. Is that enough time? Back to the council as to how the program is going. So if the seconder of the motion would agree to that amendment, I'd appreciate it.
I believe he did.
And it can be a written report with statistics. I don't think it needs to be a council study session unless we get the report and then request a study session.
That sounds good. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yes, written report?
Yes.
Okay, so any other discussion on this? Okay, we'll call the question. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, up next is item 8.1, which is Shoreline Boulevard Transit Lane and Utility Improvements, projects 16-58, project update and related items. And we will start with a staff presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. I'm Andy Chang, Senior Civil Engineer with Public Works. With me is Lisa Au, Principal Civil Engineer, as well as Mike Fuller, Public Works. I will give a presentation on an overview of Shoreline Boulevard Transit Lane and Utility Improvements Project 16-58. I will start with some background and context. This aerial photo highlights the downtown transit center and the arterial leading into North Bay Shore. In anticipation of increased growth in North Bay Shore, 2 transportation studies were completed to plan for transportation infrastructure. The first study was done in 2013. It recommended and the council approved a mode share target to decrease single occupant vehicle use and increase transit and active transportation for North Bay Shore. The second study in 2014 evaluated the Shoreline corridor and identified means for the last mile connection between North Bay Shore and the transit center. This slide highlights the corridor study and its comprehensive program to implement a number of projects to improve mobility on Shoreline corridor for transit and active transportation. Starting at the south, the city is currently working on a preliminary design of a new Central Expressway undercrossing at the transit center, shown in green on Sterling Road, and connecting through the 100 Moffett development are new bike lanes. The interim phase of these bike lanes is currently in preliminary design. The stretch in blue between Montecito and Middlefield Road are protected bike lanes, meaning that there is a raised buffer from adjacent traffic lane. This segment is in the early planning phase. The improvements between Middlefield Road and Pear Avenue are covered by the project we're presenting to you tonight. The improvements north of Pear Avenue, including the transit lane extension to Space Parkway, will be constructed with the future Plymouth Street Space Parkway realignment project. Now zooming into our project tonight, this diagram is an overview of our project limit on Shoreline. The project includes the transit lane between Middlefield Road and Pear Avenue, covering 5 intersections with a total length of approximately 2/3 of a mile. The project will also include pedestrian, bicyclist, utility improvements, and additional turning lanes. We'll get into the detail of each one of these key design elements in the following slides. The transit lane on Shoreline will serve both public and private bus shuttles. These photos are examples of current and potential bus and shuttle operators that can use the transit lane. The current plan is to allow buses with 10 or more passenger capacity, as defined by California Vehicle Code Section 233, to use the transit lane. This photo shows a dedicated transit lane in Sacramento and provides an example of what our transit lane on Shoreline will look like. The lane will be 12 feet wide with 2 feet raised buffer on each side to separate the transit lane from other vehicles. The lane opening at intersection will have red pavement color with bus-only markings to clearly distinguish it from general use lanes. Additionally, the lane will also have transit signal and signage to direct bus traffic. This next slide shows the transit signage and signal mounted above the transit lane. The transit signals will direct bus drivers within the transit lane and inform general lane car drivers to keep out of the transit lane. This diagram shows the cross-section of what Shoreline at Terabella looks like. There are both median and curbside stops planned at Terabella and Pear Avenue along the transit corridor. This next slide is shown a plan view as if you were looking down from above at Shoreline and Terabella intersection. The area shaded in orange are the bus stops. There are 2 bus stops in the median that will serve buses traveling within the transit lane. The curbside stop will serve buses traveling outside of the transit lane. This slide gives you our preliminary operation policy rules, if you will, for our transit lane. For both, as mentioned earlier, the lane will be serving both public and private buses with at least 10 passenger capacity. Transit may enter and exit the transit lane at terminal points at Middlefield Road and Pear Avenue. The lane will operate on weekdays. It will serve northbound from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. and between 2 to 3 p.m. the lane will be closed to clear all vehicles from the lane, to switch direction of operation to southbound from 3 to 10 p.m. And from 10 to 6 a.m. the lane is again closed. The speed limit in the bus lane is the same as posted speed on Shoreline at 35 miles per hour. Next, we'll get into our pedestrian and bike lane improvements for the project. Our existing curb and sidewalk will be demolished, and the street will be widened with new sidewalks. The project will construct a protected intersection at Middlefield to enhance safety for both cyclists and pedestrians. Crosswalks with shown in yellow within the 101 overpass will be enhanced to make pedestrians more visible to drivers for improved safety. The current bike lanes through our project limits are only 5 feet wide and without buffers. The project will construct protected bike lanes with 2 feet raised buffer between Middlefield Road and Terabella, as shown in the solid green lines. The bike lane between Terabella and Pear will be improved to 6 feet wide and enhanced with high visibility green bike lane markings at several locations. This slide shows the protected intersection at Middlefield Road. A protected intersection provides several benefits and increased safety for pedestrians and cyclists. It provides a physical protection for cyclists, pedestrians waiting at the corners to cross the street. It reduces the crossing distance, as well as placing pedestrians and cyclists ahead of vehicles, making them more visible to right-turning vehicles. It provides also a dedicated bike crosswalk with a buffer distance from traffic lanes. The current water and sewer mains on Shoreline Boulevard within our project limits were built in the late 50s and early 60s. For the utility improvements in the project, a new 16-inch water transmission main will be installed, as well as the existing sewer will be replaced by a larger 21-inch sewer main. The utility pipe installation and replacement will start at the Middlefield intersection and terminate before 101 overpass. These utility improvements are the initial work for a planned future project to install new and larger water and sewer pipes crossing under 101 to provide increased service capability for anticipated growth in North Bay Shore. Another design element in the project is the additional left turn lanes from both approaches on Middlefield Road to Shoreline Boulevard. This work is specified as a mitigation measure for the North Bay Shore Precise Plan and will be included and constructed by this project. This work will require demolishing portions of the Middlefield median and replaced by second left turn lane to provide dual left turn pockets in each direction from Middlefield to Shoreline Boulevard. The fourth major design element in our project is a dedicated right turn lane on northbound Shoreline before Pear Avenue. Currently, without this dedicated right turn lane, vehicles traveling northbound on Shoreline often have to wait and queue behind the right-turning vehicles at Pear Avenue. With this additional lane, it adds capacity and removes the right-turning vehicles from the through lanes, therefore improving the overall operation at the Pear intersection. Car turning right would have to yield to pedestrians and cyclists proceeding north on Shoreline Boulevard. Because there's insufficient width on the 101 overpass to accommodate both the median bus lane and the left turning lane, the last major design element in the project will eliminate the left turn pocket on northbound Shoreline to Route 85. Vehicles coming from north of 101 will not be affected by this change and can still get to Route 85 from Shoreline 101 overpass. Vehicles coming from south of 101 will have to use eastbound Middlefield Road to northbound Moffett Boulevard to get to Route 85 as shown in this diagram. The reroute of these vehicles getting to 85 from Shoreline to Moffett necessitates the need to provide a longer left turn pocket at the Moffett at 85 on-ramp. Construction of this work will be done by a separate project. This next slide shows the approximate locations of the 16 heritage trees proposed to be removed. There are 12 heritage trees on Shoreline impacted by our street widening, 4 heritage trees on Middlefield impacted by the additional left turn lanes, Staff presented these heritage trees removal and mitigation to the Parks and Recreation Commission in April and December of last year, and PRC recommends the council to approve the removal and mitigation of these 16 heritage trees. The replacement trees will be planted at various locations within our project limits. This next slide shows the additional right-of-way required for our project. These right-of-way acquisition consists of up to 6 feet width along the property frontage on 9 parcels. Staff has reached agreements with 6 property owners. The remaining properties are currently under the eminent domain proceeding with the court. Staff continues to attempt to reach agreement with these 3 property owners, but we anticipate obtaining court-ordered order of possession by the end of the year. As part of the construction coordination effort, we will include these list of measures to minimize disruption. So there will be no lane closure on Shoreline in the peak direction, as well as no lane closures on any concert nights. If lane closures are required, they're mostly taking place at night, and 1 traffic lane will remain open in each direction. We will also make sure pedestrian and bicyclist access, as well as driveway access, are maintained through our project corridor. Staff will notify and coordinate closely with residents and businesses to minimize inconvenience and disruption. This slide shows the various public outreach efforts conducted throughout our project. We've had 1 community meeting, 2 transit operator meetings, as well as public noticing of all project-related council and commission meetings. We also had numerous individual meetings with residents and property owners about our project. With our project schedule and estimate are as follows. Plans and specifications for our project are nearing completion. Staff is waiting for Caltrans permit, as well as PG&E completing their engineering plans to remove their utilities within our project limit before staff can finalize our construction documents. And staff will come back and seek council's approval of our plans and specifications later this fall. And upon council approval of tonight's item, staff will plan to remove trees for the project this fall to avoid bird nesting in the next spring. The overall construction is anticipated to start in early 2020 and finish by the end of 2021. The current estimated construction cost is at $12 million. And in conclusion of this presentation, staff recommends to council to approve the removal and mitigation for 16 heritage trees and replacement at 2-to-1 ratio with 24-inch box trees, as well as to amend Mark Thomas and Company's contract to design the improvements at Moffitt and 85 on-ramp. Thank you. Staff is available for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Clark?
Thank you for the presentation. I had just I think a couple of short questions. The nighttime construction periods, does that include the water and sewer main work too, or just the lane construction or the bus lane construction?
It includes the utility work, and the utility work will only be constructed at night.
Okay. Related to the utilities and the timeline, I know PG&E has created numerous delays on other large projects. Are we at the phase where we're sort of confident that they won't create like a year-long delay or something like that, or not yet?
Actually, Mike Fuller, Public Works Director. That's part of the reason we're not approving plans and specs tonight, actually. That's one of the things we've been a little nervous about, particularly after McKelvey. There was a substantial delay there. PG&E's work here is significant, and they have been working with us closely on designing their improvements. I don't know of any particular red flags with them delaying us, but we do need to carefully write our construction documents so that if there is a delay, assuming it's not substantial, we don't open ourselves up to significant claims from our contractor. And also, I'd like a little more assurance that barring some significant disaster, they are going to be out there when they say they're going to be out there. We're planning to have a kind of a higher level meeting with them than we have been at the project level, and I'm going to try and get a little more comfort about that before we approve plans and specs. No guarantees, but we're going to do all we can to mitigate that.
Okay, and then the diagram on slide 16 with the Route 85 access. So I just want, both for our sake and the general public's sake, because the first thing that everyone screams at me about with this is that they think that if you're coming out of North Bay Shore, you will no longer be able to get on 85 there. And that's not the case. They will still be able to get on 85. It's just if you are going northbound, like you're going into North Bay Shore, you won't be able to make that weird left turn movement. You'll still be able to get on 101, just not 85 there.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the last thing is if we, hopefully this won't happen, but if we do end up with issues initially with unauthorized vehicles in the bus lane, I assume we could do something like, I know Stanford has like pneumatic bollards and things like that vehicles can trigger. I don't think we'd want to start with that, but there are, I think, things like that we could do if it ends up being an issue, other than just writing tickets. But
yes, we've talked about a relatively low barrier to start with, so a bus could drive over it, but a Prius would get hung up on it, and then we could do something more sophisticated than that. So I think we're going to play it by ear. Fortunately, it's straight. Visibility is good. It's a well-lit street, so it's not, I mean, the hazards are relatively low, but we will be keeping a very close eye on it. There are probably a lot of operational adjustments we will make, as we move along like that, but we will certainly look at options if we need to. And actually, that's part of the reason we left a gap between the northbound and the southbound, so that there's no immediate transfer and so on. So we can certainly make operational adjustments if we do have any issues.
yeah, I guess you're right. There are things short of pneumatic bollards. There are those giant bubbles in Texas that prevent people from.
Yeah, mountable barriers. There's a lot of things we could probably look at. It's not a terribly common thing, but there are some similar improvements out there.
Thank you.
Councilmember McAllister.
Concerning the transit lane operations, how is concerts going to be able? Will concerts be able to use this middle lane, or will it be closed? And how is that? Has that been considered?
So we've had a preliminary discussion with PD as far as utilizing our transit lane in the future. We haven't had the opportunity to approach the Live Nation or their subcontractors who's performing the traffic control during concert nights. And it's a discussion that will take place. That's where we are today. But it's a discussion that will take place to be able to know what the full extent of our bus lane operation is in terms of supporting concerts.
Okay. Then also, when you did your slide 12 and 11, was there any consideration of incorporating that with our new pedestrian bridge? When you were doing the protected lines there and so forth. So are you planning to put a route in there? How's that going to work out?
So with this project, our protected bike lane starts at Middlefield and it ends at Terabella. With the new pedestrian and bike overcrossing, it will pick up at Terabella, takes those protected bike lane, take them off the street and onto the future a bike and ped bridge.
So is that future on the bridge or the new bridge?
It's a future bridge over 101.
Okay, okay. And then the size of the utility mains, so forth, do they continue the new size south of Middlefield, or is that something that will also be incorporated as time comes along, upgraded?
Can you repeat that question again?
On slide 13, you have these new water mains and sewer main. On the south side of Middlefield, are they teeing up to the same size, or will those eventually also have to be upgraded too?
The sewer, actually, the sewer main gets larger here north of Middlefield. So the sewer mains are coming east and west Middlefield and northward on Shoreline. So they're not getting larger south of Middlefield. It's just getting larger north of Middlefield to collect the other 3 sewer mains coming to this intersection. And the water main is also not expanding in size for the same reason.
On the right-of-way acquisition, about 3 or 4 years ago, we had an estimated cost of around $33 million for right-of-way acquisition. Are these acquisitions costs within line of that budget that was proposed back then?
The right-of-way acquisition for this project?
Well, yeah, because the shoreline, we were talking about then going over to get the bike lanes and so forth was part.
Does our real property program administrator have a rough estimate of the right-of-way cost? It's nowhere near that actually for this project. I think you may be including the Plymouth Space Park.
The total was $33 million. I was just wondering, are these in line with the projected budget?
Yes, I believe they are.
Dennis Drennan, Real Property Program Administrator. Council approved a project, appropriated funding for the acquisition, and we're well under that appropriated amount in our acquisitions, even with eminent domain. So we expect to be well within budget.
Okay, and so that would include the properties on the north side of 101 also?
No, at this point, we don't have any project approved for north of 101. Everything we're acquiring right now is just between Middlefield and 101.
And then we've acquired the right-of-way for Plymouth Space Park, and I think that's a separate project. And I think the one project where we might have higher than estimated costs, I'm not sure yet, is the VTA bus yard for the off-ramp realignment. We're still working with VTA on that. We are stranding a piece of property, and I will be coming back to council with that. I think that is the one that we may or may not be within our original estimate on that one.
Yeah. And the last question was, you had in here estimated cost of $12 million, and you have, is the correct saying that you have total funding for $13 million, so the thing will be fully funded project, or is that supposed to be the cost on page 13? It says total funding of $13 million, but a project cost of 12.
So that is correct. Our current estimated construction cost is $12 million, and our construction project funding is at $13 million.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor Abikoga.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Regarding the operation hours, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 3 p.m. to 10 p.m., northbound, southbound. I guess it seems long. Is there a reason for that amount of time? Is it really congested until 2 o'clock?
So the reality of, is it really congested northbound at 2 p.m.?
Yes.
We don't believe so, but I think given that we have the capability of using this lane, our current operation policy is maximize its use for buses. But as you know, that we are not opening it in the middle of the night, knowing that there will be no congestion at all. So that's our current operation policy, and it can evolve over time as needs and warrants.
How will you decide when changes need to be made? There are many questions and council questions about HOV, using it as an HOV, and I think way down the road, I was thinking this would be like a potential for AVs and maybe in our AGT, but how will you determine when we need to make some operational changes?
Well, we're, as you know, closely monitoring the vehicle trips in and out of the North Bay Shore. We're closely monitoring the mode splits, and I think that'll be a very important piece of data. And we're also working on automated guideway transit, and part of that is a conversation about dedicated lanes. Right now we're working on grade separated, but some automated vehicle technology may come out of that. So we're keeping an eye on this from several different standpoints, and I think any significant change would evolve as council discusses those different items. I don't think anything's gonna pop out and surprise us because we are looking at this from several different standpoints. And we would certainly come to council, obviously, if we're proposing any kind of fundamental change and justify that and have a conversation about that.
And then are there future plans to extend it to this as to El Caminos on Shoreline?
No, there are no current plans to do that. The Shoreline Corridor Study ended it here so that you could pick up traffic off of Middlefield Road. Another reason to pick it up here was there was a two-way left turn lane, so there was no landscape median to pull out, at least not between Terabella and Middlefield. To look at extending it south, we'd have to do a study to look at the right-of-way constraints and other impacts, and then we would have to pull out the landscape median. We could do that in the future, but we haven't done that yet.
I suppose we have to look at what bus service will be along El Camino in the future, too. And then the other question was, I was trying to remember a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, protected cycle track. So where are we on the cycle track? And I remember maybe it was just me, but some part of the cycle track being on one side. Is that still happening?
Both directions, yeah.
Yes, one side, both directions instead of on both sides.
Yeah, the cycle tracks, I think all the cycle tracks we have planned are within North Bay Shore itself.
What about the one from the transit center going down Sterling up Shoreline?
That is bike lanes on Sterling. We have a brief.
I have this recollection of a cycle track from the transit center to North Bay Shore going, through Sterling, up Shoreline, and then the bridge to Terabella and over. And this was back in 2013 or 14, maybe. So
there is a
things
bit of,
may have changed, but
well, there is a bit of a cycle track through the 100 Moffett development where we close the Sterling on-ramp.
okay, yes.
Then we get onto Sterling, and I think the current plan is to remove parking on one side to make room for bike lanes.
Got it.
And to do anything more than that would require taking more parking, moving curbs, and some other things. It's also a fairly low-volume street, so we thought bike lanes would be sufficient there. And then north of there, it is protected bike lanes. As you
But
see
not the
here,
cycle track to
there's a bit of a gap between Montecito and Middlefield. We have projects north and south of there, and I think it's in the 5-year CIP, but I don't think there were any dedicated cycle tracks south of 101 on Shoreline, except for, briefly through 100 Moffett, then there's going to be the underpass under Central and the tracks and so on, but nothing along the roadway itself.
I just recall it going up Shoreline and then crossing Middlefield onto Middlefield and Terabella over the bridge, but
They do, we do have two-way on the west side of Shoreline at Terabella. So there you cross, and we have two-way bike traffic to get over the bridge.
okay.
And then it drops down on the other side of Shoreline at the Gateway site, and that is two-way as well. So there's a short section, but it's Terabella North.
Okay. I had pictured that being the entire route would be a cycle track.
No.
Can that happen, or is it just that we don't have enough right-of-way to make that happen?
We would have to do a lot more right-of-way than we're doing now, more tree impacts. It would be a significant impact, which is why we wound up with a protected bike lane.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hicks?
Councilmember, well, I have two questions. Councilmember Abekoga touched on one, so I can make it more brief. The most number of questions I got from the public were on observations that there were maybe not a lot of buses going on Shoreline right now, and whether there was adaptability in the future. And I asked both staff and had a brief conversation with representatives from Google, and they said that they would have, when Caltrain was electrified and the lane was in, they did anticipate more employees using that route as it was faster, and that they had been talking to Public Works about that. So if that and other ways that they might adapt their current buses and other transportation enabling things like paying for Caltrans. But since that was the major thing people asked me, I don't know if you have any additional comments on adaptability in the future.
Yeah, there are a relatively limited number of buses that travel the entire corridor. I think, what is that number, Andy?
What we have currently is at 16 in the morning. That was only during the peak 1 hour period. And that's the number of buses traveling the entire corridor from end to end.
And 16 may not sound like a lot, but if you've got 25 people in them, it's 400 people, and that translates into a lot of cars. So it's still moving a lot of people. And I think what we envision is as we build infrastructure like this, then as we extend it to Space Park, as we make improvements at the downtown transit center to encourage more shuttles, as Caltrain service improves, then the companies will adapt to the infrastructure they have available to them, and that number will rise.
That does confirm what they told me. Thank you. The second question is that I'm wondering, because there's going to be, a good amount of disruption in the neighborhood and more pavement, whether we can do better than the 2-to-1 tree replacement ratio. I think that more trees could really be an asset to that corridor and to the neighborhood, and I'm wondering whether there's a way of fitting more in.
Currently, based on the constraints on our project footprint, there's very limited space available to plant trees already. We're taking available spaces on the outside in the median, north of 101, mostly in front of Computer History Museum. As you know, there's much wider planting areas. South of 101, we're already confronted with very limited footprints to build our project. So we are maximizing our available spaces. But if it is a desire of the council to do more replacement ratio, we potentially can work with community services to identify areas of our project site to plant trees.
Yeah, I would really appreciate that. 2-to-1 is a round number, which makes me wonder, if there aren't places where a few more could be placed. So thank you for that answer.
Any other questions from council members? So I had the opportunity to meet with staff last week, and I appreciated that meeting. I had lots of questions that folks who live here had asked me, and I feel like I got a much better appreciation for everything that has gone into planning this. I was not on the council when this all came about, and so it was good for me to hear all that firsthand from the folks who've been working on this for years. And I do feel much more comfortable with it. I just have a couple more questions left. And I was wondering, in the modeling we did we look at did we model preemptive signaling for the buses?
We do have preemptive modeling, but that is not the model where we build our project around, because we do know that with the preemptive signaling, it would really disrupt the intersection signals for other modes of travel. But we do have preemptive modeling in our project.
Okay. And then I think somebody sent in this question, but I didn't get to read the answer. Do we expect any of the buses that currently use Rengsdorf or San Antonio to perhaps switch and use Shoreline instead because of the bus lane?
To my knowledge, if those are buses that are part of the Google buses that are utilizing Rengsdorf and San Antonio, they potentially will have shift their traffic operations based on our available infrastructure. But as far as firm numbers, staff doesn't have any available information. But we do have in our outreach speaking to various transit operators, and they're supportive of the project. And then I think there's a correlation between having a reliable bus service that doesn't really delay them, and with increased ridership. And with increased ridership, obviously, there will be more services.
Right, okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, we'll open this up for public comment. So if there's any members of the audience who wish to address the council on this topic, please, the first one come up to the microphone. Be sure to fill out a blue card and leave it with our city clerk, either before or after you speak. And if it's been a while since you've been here, we have at the end of the 3 minutes a chime.
My name's Ken Kirshner. I'm with the Mountain View Silicon Valley Bike Coalition team. And I want to compliment the staff on the design for protected bike lanes, and it seems like you guys have done an excellent job here. I had a couple of questions about expanding this effort to protected lanes on Terabella and Pear, and whether that was a consideration. And second question is whether a larger bike network that would extend into the southbound commute shed for employees that live nearby, and whether that could be provided as a safe route to work for the North Bay Shore employee base.
Thank you. So we, yeah, thanks. Next, please.
Council members and staff. It's been a while since I've been here. A lot of new faces. My name is Karen DeMore. I'm one of the small business owners in the North Bay Shore. We have a Pilates and physical therapy studio. I'm really hopeful about this project because traffic continues to be a real danger to and threat to our business. And I also have some real concerns. And in particular, I'm looking at the staff report, and on page 12, there's something that's, I just would love some clarification on it. It says 2 lanes on Shoreline Boulevard will remain open and accessible to traffic in the peak direction. So my question is, will the outbound lanes also be 2 lanes? Are we talking 4 lanes total or 2? Because if there is any small little glitch in the system, the gridlock that happens in North Bay Shore is incredible, and we lose clients. They turn around. They can't make their sessions. So I'll just ask my questions, and if you could clarify that. And so the idea is, will all construction happen in the evening? Because there is definitely traffic throughout the day. The commuting hours are not sort of that small window, and people are coming in and leaving. So if something goes down to a 1 lane, it will impact the outbound lanes as well. With that said, I just want to make a comment that the light synchronization on Shoreline could be improved. There are some times where it's just gridlock because things are backed up from further down Shoreline, and if there could be a smoother system of making sure that the greens move people along. Otherwise, the off-ramp is just backed up onto Highway 101. And I guess those are my key questions. It's just that during construction, our businesses aren't going to be severely impacted. So thank you.
Before you leave, Councilmember McAllister has a question.
I have a question for you. Hello. Hey, so with the construction of Charles Finis and other projects before, we've asked if the business owners had an opportunity to get updates on the construction. You'd once recommended that. Has anybody followed up and given you any kind of construction impacts that affect Shoreline?
You know, I haven't. That was my other question. I know that you outreach to the property owners, but we're the businesses that are renting. And so I actually haven't. I've signed up for any alert that comes out of the city of Mountain View just so I can try to stay on top of it. But the reality is I haven't heard about this project for a couple of years, I think, since I last came out here. So, yeah, better outreach would be helpful.
Are you also getting updates on the concerts? Because that also affects.
Yes, thank you. And that has been better, but still, we cancel. We close our business a lot on especially the popular concerts. We just had to, in advance, shut down. But I do think that this last concert season was much better than the previous ones. So, and yes, we do get all the updates. That's great.
And when Google has their conferences or updates at Shoreline, do they impact the businesses, or do you get updates also on those?
We do get updates, and yes, they do impact the business.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, my name is Max Beckman-Horned. I'm a Mountain View resident. I'd like to say that I am speaking as a private citizen. I'm not speaking on behalf of the league. I am an employee of Microsoft, and for years when Microsoft was up in North Bayshore, I took a shuttle to and from the Mountain View Transit Center, both private shuttles that Microsoft ran, as well as the MVGo shuttle once it became available. So I think the one comment in general, most of this looks really great to me. I'd really appreciate having the transit lane. The one comment I wanted to make was that, again, on concert days, because specifically the Caltrain shuttle runs on a loop, that they drop people off the Caltrain shuttle and then have to go back north to get back into North Bayshore, that those were always the days we would have a very disrupted schedule. With many fewer pickups, because it took the buses so long to get back north into North Bayshore to collect us, that the way out was actually very easy, but the way back up they were caught in the same concert traffic. So I'd suggest, as we sort of update the preliminary rules of operation, that on concert days we actually keep the lane northbound the whole day for on concert days, so that to sort of optimize that time better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
I'm Joel Dean. I'm a representative of the Shadows Apartments at Shoreline and Middlefield. I have some concerns on the council report. It says on page 3 that the average time savings in the northbound PM peak be 4.5 minutes. Or 1.5 minutes net, depending on how you read this stuff. And in the evening peak, the average time savings are less than 1 minute. If that means what it says, it sounds like the project will not convince anybody to shift from SOV to transit. I have another question on the far side bus stops at Terabella. The council report says the existing curbside bus stops will remain in use, but the design shown in the diagram, those have been eliminated and replaced with curbside bus stops, which will maximize disruption by blocking cross traffic. As for the Dutch intersection at Middlefield and Shoreline, I expect this to be a killer, because they will be blocking the people making right turns will no longer be able to use the bike lane to do it. And people here are used to right on red, and they're not used to queuing up to wait for a green light to make a right turn. And the opportunity is there for them to bypass the traffic light by cutting through the Arco gas station, which they do in great numbers, and without even bothering to slow down sometimes. Some wise guy is going to figure out that they can cut through the Shadows parking lot to bypass the traffic light. And if queue gets too long, it'll extend back to Saint Pierre, and instead of making the right turn at Shoreline, they'll make it onto Saint Pierre and cut through residential streets. That's bad traffic engineering. And I frankly don't understand why they have this dedicated right turn lane at Pear Avenue, because people turning right at Pear can make a right on red, and they're not getting in the way of anybody else.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the council on this topic? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public input portion. And Are there any additional questions or comments from council members? Vice Mayor Albekoga?
Thank you. Some of our members of the public had questions. I'm sorry, I can't remember them all, but if staff remembers them, could we get, do you want to reopen?
Do we open up public comment again?
Yes, it's the mayor's discretion if you'd like to.
Sure. So you have 3 minutes. Be sure to fill out a card. Thanks. Could you speak into the microphone?
So, I'm a private resident, and I live in Sterling Estate neighborhood by Terabella. And I share this with a few, at least, maybe not the majority, but definitely the people that we talk, that the neighbors that live in that Sterling Estate neighborhood. We're not in favor so much of this project, and specifically which we are using that Terabella Shoreline intersection. So that affects us with the closure of the 85. And I mean, one of the benefits living next to a highway is having a quick access to a highway. So losing that and going all the way on Middlefield, the way it is already difficult to get out from the neighborhood, do the U-turn, go all the way to Moffett, and have that left to Moffett is not ideal already. So that's number one. So there is definitely traffic time in the morning, 100%. And by the time later in the day, even 10, after maybe 11, maybe sooner, but there's zero traffic. So having that raised bus lane and not be able to use whatever is available right now, the way it is right now, it's not great. So we are helping maybe one thing and not helping something else and making it worse for the future, I think. Yes, I think that's it. I'm nervous, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll close public input again. So the Vice Mayor was asking about some of the questions. So some of them were a clarification on construction and number of lanes.
Yes, the 2 lanes. And then I believe from the Bike Coalition, it was about more protected bike lanes southbound from the intersections, Terabella and Pear, okay.
Yes, so to clarify, knowing the progressive backup on Shoreline, northbound in the morning and southbound in the afternoon, where the report says that two lanes will remain open and accessible to traffic in the peak direction, it really is meant to say that during the peak direction, there's no lane closed. I think the report was written considering south of when the 2 lane was referenced, it was referenced there are 2 lanes south of 101.
Yes.
So when we have to maintain 2 lanes open in the peak direction, it's equate to no lane closures in the peak direction throughout the day.
Okay, great. Construction hours are evenings only, is that correct?
If there are opportunity to be able to, for example, in the morning, if there's a limited opportunity to work in the southbound direction where there's very light traffic and it is necessary to take 1 lane, that could be a scenario where contractor might approach the city and then our city will determine the feasibility of allowing them to close lanes in the off-peak direction.
Got it, okay, great. And then protected bike lane, intersections at Pear and Middlefield? Terabella, sorry.
So I think as we have previously described, this particular project will construct protected bike lane between Middlefield to Terabella. And the future 101 pedal bike overcrossing will basically pick up the protected bike lane at Terabella and take them over the 101, on the new bridge, and land them at Pear Avenue.
Great, thank you. So just some comments other than that. Thank you to staff for working on this. I guess yeah, and like as my questions earlier, I recall this has been a ongoing project for some time. I guess I look at this as a project for the future as well. So I know that we've received concerns about the number of buses and, in relation to single occupancy vehicles using mainly Shoreline Boulevard, but this is really looking to the future and the hope of having more folks use transit by making transit more convenient. So, the mindset, and I totally get it, and I'm trying to be more conscious of myself about using alternative modes of transportation, but it's been, until now so easy to get in the car and drive wherever. And with congestion, it's become more challenging. And then I remember from my VTA days when we looked at this, part of the idea of trying to change make a mind shift into getting folks to consider transit was to make it easier for transit to move, to use transit, to ride transit, to get to where you want to go on transit. And 4 minutes, 1 minute, 4 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but I remember studies back in the day, and this was mostly about with light rail, but even that 1 or 2 minutes really made a difference to get people to think about using transit. And so I look at this as one of those projects, I look forward to. I mean, my hope is that down the road we do have a robust transit system. I know we're studying the shuttle, our community shuttle, and how we can maybe consolidate with all the other shuttles. My dream or my vision is to have one shuttle system in the city that goes everywhere in the Mountain View. Mountain View is not very big. Within 10-minute headways, I'd be happy with. And perhaps if that were to happen, then people would really get out of their cars and use this system. So to me, this is one part, of creating infrastructure to hopefully enable something like that to happen down the road. So that, and definitely, we want to encourage more folks to bike. Not quite, hoping maybe down the road we'll get that cycle track, but protected bike lanes are very, are important. So for those reasons, I will be supporting this, although I guess today we're just approving the amendment to the contract and the heritage trees. And I would say yes to the 56 folks using the 85 ramp from, which frankly I had no idea we had that. I usually go to Middlefield and Moffett. So, but we do have other options, and in the big picture, I hope that we can move towards a more transit-friendly community. Thanks.
Councilmember McAllister?
I was so glad to hear the Vice Mayor was glad to invest in new technology along this particular route. That was refreshing. Thank you, Vice Mayor. The question, I had one question that was a follow-up on the table, on the council questions. On the table 1, were you able to break out we're under transit? I gather you're referring most of that transit as corporate shuttles. Were you able to break out public transit on that table?
These are data gathered from our planners when they did the gateway studies, monitoring. To my knowledge, I don't have those breakdown of whether it's public or private or which corridor these transits are coming in. These are overall number for the North Bay Shore split.
Okay, because I remember it's like, at one time it was around 2% was our, or less for VTA coming through there.
Yeah, Councilmember McAllister, we actually do have that data. I apologize. Martin Alkire from Community Development pulled that out and forwarded it to me, and there it sat. So actually, I'll send you that information tomorrow if you'll permit. I apologize for that.
I just wanted to confirm that it was pretty much what it was. So, we did start this in 2013, and there were some good points by Joel and Albert and William about Terabella wasn't really on the table for development. So as we morph this project together, are we looking at the increased density that's going to be off of Terabella on either side, and how that would affect this particular transit lane? Was that incorporated?
I actually was approached by the developers who are working on the residential development at the Shoreline and Terabella corner of that development. I think they're excited about this project, and I do believe that they have planned to heavily use our transit as it becomes available.
Well, that's one project, but I mean, there's been quite a few that have been coming up to us, so I was just wondering, has that been, are you planning for the numbers you're using, or for the EIR or preliminary one, was back in 2013, or have we updated to the potential development of Terabella area?
No, we didn't do any reanalysis of, the actual design of the transit lane because of the land use changes in Terabella. The environmental document for this, I believe, was the North Bay Shore Precise Plan environmental document. I think we recognize, though, that as redevelopment occurs around it and there are other opportunities to use the lane, we will adapt to that. But there are a lot of moving targets right now with land use changes and developments, and we haven't stopped design of a project like this necessarily, and continued to have the design evolve. But I think the operation of it, we can certainly be flexible and accommodate additional uses as land use changes occur.
Would our study of the AGT potentially replace that, right of way?
Yeah, I think there are two scenarios there. One of the things we talked about was using this corridor for some kind of an elevated system, which could go over the top of it, and you could have basically a two-level system, bi-directional, different opportunities there. I think another opportunity is if automated vehicle technology gets to the point where they could occupy this lane. We still have some at-grade intersections, so the technology would have to be able to deal with that. But I think there's an automated vehicle scenario in the lane as well. So we've always seen this as a corridor that will adapt to technology. And right now the technology is, we have a lot of shuttles stuck in traffic.
So when you were thinking of autonomous vehicles, were you talking autonomous buses? Because
potentially, yeah.
Okay, versus a single occupancy autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, no, I think we want to move a lot of people in as few vehicles as possible in a lane like this. And so, yeah, I would envision buses. Okay. We're not there yet, obviously, but again, we can adapt the corridor.
Okay, and so we all got some letters from constituents like Joel and so forth. So we'll have time to maybe digest a lot of his questions, and would those possibly be used in future modification or tweaks of this particular project, or just be able to answer his questions?
I'd be happy to answer additional questions. I think in terms,
no, not tonight, but just offline.
Yeah, I think in terms of this project, our next step is to come back with plans and specs. But I think in the future, as we adapt the uses of this lane, that'll certainly be a robust public conversation. Okay.
Yeah, I echo the Vice Mayor's comments that we are building for the future, and yes, in the near time, this could be somewhat inconvenient for some of our residents, but we do need to acquire right-of-way. We're doing that pretty much with VTA, that we're looking at right-of-way is so important to get our transit system, our public transit, so that people can get on it, move quickly, and take advantage of what we have out there and reduce congestion. So I look forward to this too.
I had a follow-up question, but you continued on, so I guess I'll ask it separately. Okay. Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you. First, so thank you again for responding to the large number of questions that we submitted. And I understand you also met with a couple of residents who were concerned about this, so thank you very much for taking the time to respond to their concerns. I have a couple of questions based on some of the operational questions that have come up. So if, for instance, as the response to one of the written questions indicates, if the conditions warrant, let's say there isn't as much demand, bus usage of the lane as we anticipate, we wanted to repurpose it as an HOV lane, would that have to come back to council? How would we, at what point would staff be comfortable determining whether this would be a viable lane for HOV purposes?
I think a change like that would come back to council. I think that's a significant change. And I think we would do some pretty sophisticated modeling to see the impacts to other lanes, the traffic signal operation. I mean, a lot of carpool vehicles is a different operational scenario than a relatively small number of buses. A relatively small number of buses is pretty simple. They don't need a long queue jump at the end to get back into regular traffic and so on. I see a carpool lane being a lot more complicated, and I think we'd have to do a lot of study to be comfortable recommending that, and I think we would come back to council.
Okay, thank you. And then similarly, Max's question about, if I understood it correctly, during concert season or concert evenings, using the lane to help facilitate the flow for shuttles that have a sort of a circular route. Is that something that staff has already looked at? Is that, what did you think of that recommendation?
So again, I think our operation currently are set up simple so that we can actually, once we have the bus lane built, we can monitor it, test it, and just see how overall the operation, how it meets our performance expectations. And I think as time goes on, there's definitely a potential for expanding services as the needs come up. And just as Mike had mentioned, that there has to be some studies looking at how it may impact the overall operation of other vehicle users and how it may potentially diminish more inconvenience. And so those are things that we will definitely look into as we carry out our project into sort of the operational phase. Currently, we have our design to build a project. We're 2 years out in completing the project, but we do want to have this opportunity to have our preliminary operation in place. And as we putting into service, we can actually expand as the need comes up.
Thank you. And then I'm confident you've already met with all of the bus and shuttle operators who would likely use this lane to get a sense of their needs and everything. So, okay, that's good. And I think that's everything I have on this. So I agree with the Vice Mayor and Councilmember McAllister. This is a forward-looking project as we anticipate a potentially dramatic increase in Caltrain ridership. I think connecting the transit center in downtown to North Bayshore becomes increasingly important, and this is, I think, this is an essential project long-term to help facilitate that that connection. So thank you for your years of work on this.
Councilmember Kamei?
Great, thank you. The Vice Mayor beat me to seconding the motion. I tried to get him to move it along. So, in reading the staff report, it sounds like this will come back to council for us to do further discussion. So I don't have any questions at this point that weren't already asked or answered in council questions.
Actually, you know what? This would come back on the consent calendar.
Oh, it would. We can always pull that item if we want to discuss it.
Correct.
Right, okay. I'm learning. All right. So, I think that...
So a few questions now. Yeah, ask them now.
Well, I think that for me, one of the things that's important is finding ways to do mode share opportunities throughout the entire city. And so I was happy when council looked at the El Camino Real and having bike lanes there as an opportunity to make it more pedestrian and cycle friendly. And I think everybody up here as well as in the city is looking for alleviation of traffic congestion on Shoreline and in and out of North Bay Shore. And so I feel comfortable supporting it. I think that there are some important points to highlight. Councilmember McAllister mentioned how we're able to incorporate the Terabella, whether that's a visioning plan or a precise plan, and how that development, particularly for me, the residential development component, can be integrated in what we're looking at on Shoreline. How are we going to make that integrate it into the community versus making it something that's not ideal for the community. Also, I think later on this year, we're going to be looking at scooters and other items for getting around. And so as we're looking at the last mile, if people are taking scooters, how can we incorporate that into the Shoreline plan as well, and making it ability for mixed flow in terms of cycling and scooters? Should we go forward with that in the fall? I'd also like to take that into consideration. I thought the important points also were the noticing of the local small businesses. I think that it's important for them to be kept up to speed, as well as if, community members want to sign up and get notifications. I think that would be really important, especially for the residents who live in that area. Thank you.
Councilmember Hicks.
So I agree with generally what the rest of council has been saying. I will be supporting the motion as long as we do what Mr. Chang had also recommended, look at additional places to place trees, make it not just a 2-to-1 ratio. And I agree with other things that the council has said, that this is an important project for the future, and it's also important to continue to look and adapt to needs as Terabella develops, and also as maybe unexpected things happen, fewer buses, etc. But yeah, additional trees are important to me. Thank you.
So following up on Councilmember McAllister's question.
Which question?
Yes, regarding growth in the Terabella area. If a project or a precise plan EIR is done, in the Terabella area, will it take a look at the impact on this reversible lane?
I think as part of the EIR process, it will consider the transit lane when they do their various assessments during the EIR process.
Okay.
And even if it's not done as part of the EIR, if it's something you want to do as part of the actual, the CEQA's has some constraints in what you do and you don't do to comply with CEQA. If there's something broader that, council's interested in looking at in terms of evaluating land use changes in Terabella, we don't have to be necessarily constrained by the CEQA process.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's important. I appreciate the comments about the backup on Middlefield, since I'm often coming the same direction on Middlefield, and I'm usually turning left onto Shoreline, but once in a while I go right on Shoreline. And yes, everyone is queued up in the bike lane, which is kind of upsetting because that's a bike lane. It's not an extra lane for vehicles. And I could see where it's going to be a real change for folks. And I do imagine they are going to cut through the gas station. They do already. And they're likely to cut through other places. So it'd be good if we really take a look at that to figure out how do we keep folks on Middlefield as opposed to cutting through all the other opportunities where they could do that, because it definitely backs up there. So I think most of the comments I would echo. We are looking at this for the future. I'm glad I had the opportunity to meet with staff to discuss this in great detail, because I do feel, as I said earlier, more comfortable with it. I appreciate the comment about more trees, and I would like to look for opportunities, whether they be right there or close by, to add more trees. I also appreciate the comments about noticing, and I'm not sure how is it possible to sign up for that? Or do we just automatically notice everyone in North Bay Shore?
I think it is possible. So for example, when we had our community outreach, residents and business that show up, actually their numbers, contact are gathered. And when I do have public meetings like these, I do send them notifications. So perhaps it's something that can be done independently.
Or if it was, you can have the drop down online where you can pick all of the things you want to be noticed about. I certainly feel like, awareness of construction in the area might be a good one to add to that list.
Staff can look into adding that.
Great, thank you. And I think the one thing I want to emphasize is that I don't think the current plan is what will ultimately be the plan. It sounds like we're going to continue to take a look at this and look at modifications, other uses, different hours, all kinds of things, because we're really trying to optimize this. And this is a great first start, but I think it's important to emphasize that we're going to be flexible and make sure we're getting the most out of this, because this is a huge project. So with that, it looks like we have a motion from Councilmember Ramirez, but I'm not sure what the motion is. Is it the staff recommendation?
To approve the staff
You
recommendation.
often add other things. That's why I wasn't sure.
Would it be helpful to explicitly include opportunities to increase the number of trees and then also the noticing enhancements, I guess? Then I will include that.
So clarity of motions is always ideal. On the trees issue, the currently worded requires a 2-to-1. That would be the bare minimum. I think what staff would do is go beyond that to the extent and wherever possible. You can add it to the motion, but we will do that regardless. I would caution you to put something explicit in the motion about a certain number or something, because we won't know until we're in the field how many and where they would go. In terms of noticing, again, you can put that in the motion if you want, but I think what staff will look at is ways to better inform the community or have a centralized place or sign up for all North Bay Shore related construction activities. That doesn't have to be in the motion, but you can add it if you so choose.
I don't intend to be prescriptive, so as articulated by the city manager, the staff recommendation, and then, if staff is able to add trees and that kind of thing, then I think that's our desire.
And we have a second by the Vice Mayor. Any comments?
Unless you wanted to just say at a minimum ratio of 2.2 and 2-to-1.
Okay, so we have the
Yeah, and just to confirm, the motion includes the amendment of the contract. Okay, thank you.
right, so we just tweak number 1 to say a minimum of a 2-to-1 ratio of 24 boxes, and then the contract. Okay. Any other discussion? I will add, I forgot one other thing I wanted to say, and that was I hope all these improvements do increase ridership on bicycles, because it's gone down. It used to be about 5 to 6% for a couple years, and for several years now it's been 2 to 3%. So it's disappointing to see that number down. Okay, anything else? Okay, we'll call the question. And that motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much for your work on this one. Okay, up next is item 8.2, which is the proposed response to Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury Report, the inquiry into governance of the Valley Transportation Authority. And we will start with a staff presentation.
Good evening. I'm Dawn Cameron, Assistant Public Works Director, and with me here is Mike Fuller, Public Works Director. Yes. On June 18th, the Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury released its report, Inquiry into Governance of the Valley Transportation Authority, otherwise known as VTA. Its primary conclusion was that the VTA board needs structural changes to protect the interests of taxpayers and meet the transportation needs of the county. The city is required to respond to one finding and 3 recommendations in the report by September 16th. The required response format is for findings, the city is to agree, disagree, or partially disagree. For recommendations, there's one of 4 responses. The recommendation has been implemented, it will be implemented, further analysis is required before implementation, or it will not be implemented because it's unreasonable or not warranted. As background to the grand jury's findings, here's a brief overview of the VTA board structure. The VTA board consists of appointed elected officials. There are 12 voting members. 5 are from the City of San Jose City Council. 2 are County Board of Supervisors. 1 member representing 4 North County cities, and the current member representative is Councilmember John McAllister for the North County cities. 1 board director representing 5 West Valley cities, and 1 director representing 2 South County cities. And finally, 2 directors representing 3 cities in the central northeast area of the county. There are also up to 3 non-voting members. These are the Santa Clara County representatives to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And these 3 representatives are 1 member from City of San Jose, 1 County Board of Supervisors, and 1 non-San Jose City Council member appointed by the Cities Association. So the city was requested to respond to finding number 1 in the grand jury report, which basically says the VTA board suffers from a lack of experience, continuity, and leadership, that the directors have inadequate time to devote to VTA duties due to their city responsibilities or other local jurisdiction responsibilities. There is a lack of engagement by some directors. Key policy and funding decisions can be dominated by the county and City of San Jose, and there can be a tension between the director's duties to VTA and their duties to their local jurisdiction. Staff's proposed response to this finding is to agree. Although there can be nuances to the level of agreement with each of these points, overall staff's observations are the VTA board is challenged by each of these factors. The grand jury also requested a city response to recommendation 1C, which are connected to recommendations 1A and 1B. Recommendation 1A is that VTA should commission a study of the governance structure of successful large city transportation agencies, looking at factors such as the board size, the methods of selection of board members. Are they directly elected, appointed elected officials, non-elected officials, the whole range. The potential terms of board members, the director qualifications, and how they represent their constituent communities. Recommendation 1B is the county should do the same study. Recommendation 1C is that each city should prepare a written report on VTA's governance structure, looking at all of these same factors that the study mentioned in 1A will look at, and provide this report to VTA and the County Board of Supervisors. Staff's proposed response is that the city will not prepare the report as specified because it is unreasonable. Our primary concern, general concern with the grand jury's recommendations is that it does not include a process for developing consensus on potential changes among the cities and the county for the VTA board. Also, having 2 separate studies and 15 individual city reports is an inefficient use of scarce resources. We feel that the most productive way to proceed would be for the city to provide input after the comparative study is completed and prior to developing consensus on any changes to the VTA board. In addition, we are recommending the city join with some of our neighboring cities in suggesting that an independent organization such as the Cities Association prepare a study, it can be in addition to VTA study, and lead a collaborative process with the cities. This could take the place of each of the 15 cities having to prepare their own individual reports. Finally, we suggest that the study parameters be broadened The transit agency study should also include those transit agencies that serve multiple cities, not just large city transportation organizations. We also suggest they could look at board operational policies and procedures as another way to ensure how the voting is representing the needs in the entire county, such as what the voting thresholds could be for major decisions. The grand jury also is requiring responses to recommendations 1D and 1E. Both of these recommendations propose changes to state enabling legislation for the VTA board. Our recommendation is that we respond that this requires further analysis before implementing. We feel it is premature to commit to proposing or supporting legislation prior to completing the studies and developing consensus on potential changes. And that concludes staff report, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Okay, seeing no questions from council members, we'll open this up for public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to address the council on this item? Seeing none, we will close the public input portion and bring it back to council for discussion. Vice Mayor Abe-Kuga.
Thank you. So I read our letter, response letter, and I think it's fine. I agree with the points that are made in light of the question that we were asked to respond to. I guess for me, having been on the VTA board, having chaired the VTA board, and this was, oh gosh, 8 years ago, 8 years ago, and I know these grand jury reports have happened a couple of times with the VTA. I joined back then after the last one happened, and there was another Hayes, I think it was the Hayes report. And we had the recession, and we had to close a $40 million deficit. I guess to be honest, I'm shocked at these numbers. The fare box recovery back then was 14%, and that was bad, and now we're down to 7.6. So, my question is, what happened in the last 6 years or so? But I do agree with a lot of the challenges with the governance structure, and my feeling has been, having served on that board, that in light of the challenges with one city having almost half the votes, including the county reps who end up, usually one of them at least is from San Jose, I really have been advocating when I can for a directly elected board that divides up the county and also would just kind of divvy up San Jose. So I hope that these studies that that we're recommending be done look at that. And so for that, I will support what we recommend. I was intrigued in about the Cities Association doing one of the studies. I'm on the board there now, and I would welcome actually that opportunity. So yes, I think this is a good response. I will also say though, and I don't know if this is the opportunity, but one thing that happened back in those 2010, I believe it was, after the last report, was that there was a change in the county grouping, the city groupings, and back then, we were in a 6-city grouping with 3 representatives. It was Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Los Altos Hills, and Palo Alto. And they changed the grouping to the 4 we have now. We had 3 reps from that 6-city grouping. We then went to 1 rep for 4 cities. And we basically lost a seat to South County. And so Morgan Hill and Gilroy now have had a rep for those 2 cities that came from the North County seat. I would like to, at some point, and I don't know if this is appropriate time, but I would like to look at or suggest that we look at that. The argument back then was that South County is where the growth is going to happen. I would argue that that has not happened, and we are, in fact, we're growing. And so at a minimum, I would like to see us get that seat back in North County. So if nothing else changes, at least we should get our representation back. So I would just add that, and I don't know if this is the time to add it, but I hope that we can revisit that down the road. Thanks.
Other comments? Councilmember McAllister.
Thank you for those kind words. Everything you spoke was the truth. For the public, I am on the VTA board. I am also the chair of the ad hoc committee that is reviewing all these concerns from the grand jury and more, because we were formed before the grand jury report came out to see how we could change the structure and make the process and policy making and the voting at the VTA fairer and more productive. They are doing a study, or the ad hoc committee has recommended, we sent out an RFP to a company called RMS, who is the existing independent auditor for VTA. So a studying is in the works right now. And hopefully a lot of these questions will be addressed and a lot of the concerns will be taken care of. One thing that we had a discussion of our response. Some cities, if you have an opportunity to go beyond what the grand jury or the law allows you to do, and Palo Alto and Cupertino added more to it. So I would always encourage more to our response, because it is going to a judge, even if it's possibly in a preamble saying, you know, these are our concerns. But I have met with some other cities, and we are encouraging them to be, I'm encouraging them to be as vocal as possible. One proposal I'm just talking to how the voting was done, the Vice Mayor, was that to change it from the cities, I think we have to go through a legislative thing. But what we can do internally is potentially say, for certain amounts over such amount, you need 3/4 of a vote. And therefore it sort of neutralizes or sort of balances the power base. And so those are some of the ideas we're talking about. But it was interesting that the VTA, the grand jury report came out with a lot of these things. I appreciate staff report on this one. It's there's a lot of issues going on in here, and I think this is a start to a small reform of VTA because it needs it.
Any other comments? In response to the Vice Mayor, I think what happened, one of the things that happened, because we're seeing this across the country, is more people are taking the ride-hailing companies, and it's having a huge impact on public transportation. So I believe I read in New York City, ridership's down 3 percentage points, so a total of 3 percentage points. And I can imagine the same thing is happening here. Did you have specific things you thought should be added? When you said perhaps we should be saying more?
I did discuss this with staff, and they did sort of, we did add some items to it, but depending on if we went with the letter of the law saying when you respond to a grand jury report, you are limited to agree, disagree, or partially, and that you have to put your response with some of that category. I think our city attorney could help me out, or Don could help us out on that one. And the ad hoc committee will definitely be adding more recommendations. But if the city manager has a comment on this one, I would.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we are legally bound to respond a certain way. We have sort of gone beyond that and added a little bit of commentary in the follow-up paragraphs. I think we do cover the concept of the kinds of things we want them to look at, including a supermajority. But Vice Mayor's suggestion for a directly elected, we don't address that explicitly, but that certainly would be the kind of reform and/or the adjustment in the seatings. I think those are the kinds of things we'd be looking for in the options that come back. I think we could probably find a way to be more explicit, not prescriptive that that's what we want, but these are the kinds of options we hope will be explored, if that's the wish of the council.
And in fact, just to note, that was part of the grand jury's recommendation 1A, is that the study will consider directly elected as well as continuing the appointed elected, and as I said, the potential of appointed non-elected officials. So the grand jury report already specifies that they think all of these options should be explored and studied.
Yeah, we were limited to only answering a few questions, where if you look at the grand jury, there was a lot more responses required.
So would you suggest we include in the letter the issue of the seats and North County regaining that, at least regaining that seat, if not? I mean, the argument is about population, and San Jose has half the seats because of their population, but it's not, everywhere else is not based on population, and I think it just needs to be a fair standard.
I mean, just looking at this slide, I don't know the exact population of the two South County cities, but I'm pretty darn certain
It's about 100,000.
It's less than the 4 cities in the North County. My suggestion would be not to be prescriptive that, North County wants another seat, but that the seating arrangement should be re-examined as part of any reform effort.
I'd just like to comment that Palo Alto did go specifically to, they needed to vote at, so they were being more prescriptive. One of the other items is, does the county really need 2 people? Because San Jose incorporates a lot of what the county does, and so is that one too many seats for the county? I mean, so a lot of all these issues are going to be looked at and discussed. But if the council wants to be more prescriptive, I would support any additional comments.
So if studies are done, would those come back to us for comment? Or is this our one and only time?
Our recommendation would be the studies need to go back to all the cities, including us, for review and comment, and whether they bring them back or not, we'll be monitoring it and we'll bring them back. One suggestion would be that we could add a sentence in the response saying, we generally concur with the study parameters proposed by the grand jury, which should include these different possible methods of selecting the members, how the representation is determined. Palo Alto suggested other avenues besides population, could also look at employment, sales tax revenue generation. So a general sentence about, yes, we agree that all of these pieces should be examined as part of the study, I think could easily be added.
Okay.
I would like to add that, especially population, but also I was thinking employment growth as another factor. So if the maker of the motion would agree to those additions.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's a project going on right now that is going to be serving 1,700 people a day, and yet we continue to see, I just went down SR 85, I do that occasionally in the morning, and you'll see traffic backed up. I get on Fremont all the way down to Highway 17, and there's thousands of people, and yet we're not, here's just a preaching right now, but VTA is looking at adding for residential, but they're not looking at where the jobs are going and all that increase in traffic. And so that's another direction that we need to make sure that the VTA starts looking at is, and it could be one of the criteria, again, employment. It says, we're going to be adding 1,000, close to over 100,000 people along the 237 North Bayshore corridor, and yet we're not adding any transportation. Oh, excuse me, 237 is making an express lane, therefore making the HOV lane become one and then moving everybody to the other 2 lanes. But yeah, that is definitely a criteria that should be considered. Can you incorporate that in there, along with the supermajority one, please?
We'll incorporate whatever this council directs through your motion.
Okay.
Okay, so it was the staff recommendation plus a couple of additions.
Consideration of employment centers supermajority over a certain threshold of dollars, have the cities have the opportunity to comment back to the grand jury. Actually, it's going to the judge, if I'm not mistaken, on the reports, the VTA report. And you want something
Any
with
studies done?
Yeah, and then we're looking at, and the Cities Association was already in there, correct?
It was.
Yeah. Other cities already mentioned that they would like to see this. Again, there was we've talked to some other cities and they're interested in doing the city association. And some cities have also already offered to put some money towards that too, so. So that's something that this council may want to consider down the road as city association may consider that, funding it.
I think our official position would be VTA should fund the study. If ultimately the cities association does take it on and it's deemed that the member agencies should contribute, we would certainly bring that to you.
Okay, any other comments? Is everyone clear on the motion? Do you want to, is everyone clear on the motion? Okay.
Well, the staff is clear.
We'll call the question then. I just want to make sure everybody understands the motion.
That's important.
It is.
That's our parting.
And that passes unanimously.
It's not 3 a.m. yet.
Okay. And when is that due? It's September?
It's due September 16th.
Okay.
So we'll make the revisions to the letter and have it ready for your signature.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Meeting should go.
Okay, item 9, council, staff, and committee reports. Vice Mayor Abikoga?
Thank you. So I hope everyone had a great summer. But over the summer, as we all know, we had the unfortunate incident at the Gilroy Garlic Festival with the mass shootings, and we continue to see more of those throughout the country. I've had many residents come up to me asking, what can we do? And I did propose this during our goal setting. I didn't quite get enough of a majority to look at this, but in light of the increased issues, concerns around safety and gun safety, I wanted to ask all of you if you would reconsider, and I'm happy to look at what we might have to take off our work plan to do it, but doing an overview of gun safety and measures, policies that I know the state has some. I was mostly focused on Sunnyvale because as a city they've passed gun safety measures and they've been tested in court and have been solid. But my hope was that maybe we could look at adopting similar policies around gun safety. The other issue that, or program that has come up, and I saw our DA, Rosen, at the National Night Out event. There's a gun buyback program that happens at the county, and I guess there's some talk about doing one of the days in North County, and so I was hoping that's something that maybe Mountain View could participate in. But so just overall, in light of what's going on, I felt that it was important to ask you all if you would reconsider looking at gun safety measures as a priority for our city. Thanks.
Would that include vehicles too?
What do you mean?
So the issue before you tonight is whether or not to agendize a discussion on a future agenda to talk about it. In that item, we could get more clarity about what is or isn't included as part of it, as well as the trade-offs and the workload implications of doing it. Just for the record, I believe Mountain View has participated in a regional gun buyback in the last year or two. We're certainly open to doing it here as well if that's the countywide priority.
Yeah, so I don't know, Councilmember Ramirez, if you were going to comment on that, but if we're going to move to another topic, I'd like to close off on this one first. So are there any comments about the Vice Mayor's proposal? I personally do support it. I would like to have the discussion and look at trade-offs, so the motion to bring it back for us to discuss, I do support. Councilmember Hicks, was yours on this topic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would also support looking over our goals and seeing whether we can take something off and put this on.
Why don't we do a show of hands of how many are in support of that?
Well, I'd like to clear.
Oh, did you have a comment on that?
I had a question on that.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Is the county, I mean, if we're going to do this, I'd sort of like to see that other surrounding cities are doing something similar so that we're all having the same rules that are going into. So do we know if any other cities or the county is doing some kind of a review of the gun safety?
I'm not aware offhand. That's certainly something that, should this be reprioritized, that we would look at and report back to you on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, I was just going to say two things. One would be, I would hope as part of that agenda item discussion, we could talk about how the cities association might play into that. And then the other would be, I hesitate to do it before the end of the year a little bit, since we've already sort of sorted our, I mean, if folks, I mean, I'm just one. So if you all feel that it's going to be more important than the things we're going to talk about before the end of the year, then that's fine. But having looked at the next few months calendar, I don't see anything on there that I think I would push out, but that's just me.
You wanted to go to CPC first?
I'm open to that. I just think it's going to be really tough to find a slot on the council calendar for a couple of hour discussion, and I guarantee you a lot of people will show up to talk about this, having been through this once before.
So just to comment again, if the item for tonight is whether or not to bring back an agenda item on whether or not to discuss it, that we could certainly do before the end of the year. I think it's highly unlikely that we would bring back any analysis or recommendations before the end of the year. And whenever it comes back, even the first one, there will be workload implications that we'll have to, other things we'll have to adjust. We would have to look at what the most likely candidates, depending on who would need to be involved in this.
Okay, any further comments on this? Okay, so a show of hands of how many are supportive of bringing back as an agenda item a discussion about whether or not we want to prioritize this. And at that time, would we talk about the implications of what could be pushed out? Or would we wait until we have the discussion?
I think we could provide some preliminary. It really depends how big this project is, and we wouldn't know that until you've kind of scoped it out.
Okay. Okay, so all those in favor, raise your hand. That looks like it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, any other items that council members? Okay. So I'll report that over the summer we had 2 meetings of the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz County Roundtable on airplane noise. And we are working on our strategic plan and our work plan. And I'm part of a subcommittee. There's 4 of us. I'm sorry, it's an ad hoc committee to edit those documents to bring back for consideration by the full body. And I did send out a summary of what's transpired. Airplane noise is a really complex topic, and it would be good to have another person kind of involved with this, because I think we're going to be talking about this a long time. And I am meeting with Councilmember Hicks. Actually, I am meeting with Councilmember Hicks to go into detail about airplane noise. And then also, the Cities Association, actually, I'm on the board and you're on the executive board. So there's a transportation subcommittee of the board, and we had a call to talk about actually the response to the grand jury report. And we did decide that we want to look at what all the responses are from the different cities. And so I feel like that would be a natural group to talk to about doing a study. But we did have a good conversation about the report, the grand jury report, that is. And that's all I have on mine. So anything else? Okay, then. Immediately following this session, we are going to have a closed session in the Plaza conference room. And what we will do is have the announcement here, as well as take public input on any of the other items on that agenda. So if you want to do the announcement, our city attorney.
Yes, I will. It's kind of a long one tonight. The council will be meeting in closed session on 4 items. The first is conference with real property negotiator, Government Code 54956.8, the property 1600 North Shoreline Boulevard, APN 116-10-070, 1616 North Shoreline Boulevard, APN 116-10-086, 1674 North Shoreline Boulevard, a portion, APN 116-10085, 1015 Joaquin Road, a portion, APN 116-10097. The agency negotiator is Dennis Drennan, Real Property Program Administrator. The negotiating party is Google LLC. Under negotiation, price in terms of payment for acquisition of real property. The second item is conference with real property negotiator, Government Code 54956.8, the property Gamble Way, a public street, no APN, agency negotiator Dennis Drennan, Real Property Program Administrator. Negotiating party is Kevin Donardi, the Donardi Group. Under negotiation, price in terms of payment for the sale of real property. The third, conference with real property negotiator, Government Code 54956.8, the property portion of 711 Calderon Avenue, APN 158-04001. The agency negotiator, Dennis Drennan, Real Property Program Administrator. The negotiating party, Julie Alice Whitman and Carrie Thompson Weigel, trustees of the Weigel Marital Trust, UTA, dated April 6, 1982. Under negotiation, price in terms of payment for the possible acquisition of real property. And the last is public employee appointment, California Government Code 54957B1, title of position, city manager. So those are all 4. If there's any public comment, we will take it now.
And be sure to let us know which item you're talking about and fill out a blue card.
Will do, and I'll also fill out the one for the drones, because I forgot to do that. So yeah, I don't know exactly what's going to go on with item 11.2, but Gamble Way, the residents who live there are predominantly Hispanic, and this does represent a pretty big displacement risk for them, low-income people. The process has been a little bit rough for them, as the developer has been, they introduced an initial application, then they withdrew it, then they modified it, and it's just been quite a burden on the residents. So, I would only say please keep that in mind as you discuss that item. And then for 11.4, Danridge, I'm going to miss you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to provide public comment on any of the closed session items? Okay, if not, we'll close the public input portion, and we'll ask the city attorney if we expect any closed session report.
I do not expect any reportable action.
Okay, thank you. So after a brief recess, we will reconvene in the Plaza conference room for the closed session, And then following the closed session, the city council will adjourn to the next city council meeting to be held on Tuesday, September 10th, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. in the Plaza Conference Room, 500 Castro Street. And the regular council meeting is adjourned.